The night view from the windows of New York's skyscrapers looked just like Catherine Montgomery's life. The glittering lights were proof of the success she had built over the past decade. Catherine stood at the pinnacle of her career as an international financial consultant, a name that commanded respect even on Wall Street. On her office wall hung just one photograph, a landscape of Willow Creek, the small Pennsylvania town where she grew up and which she had left 10 years ago with big dreams. The small white house in the picture was still home to her family. Catherine sat at her desk, staring at the bank transfer history displayed on her computer screen. For years, she had been regularly sending financial support to her family, medical expenses for her mother Barbara, business recovery funds after her stepfather Howard's venture failed, tuition for her brother Greg, and even part of the mortgage for her Aunt Ruth and her husband Arthur. It all rested on her shoulders. However, during the past 6 months, Catherine's transfers had decreased, and her communication had become less frequent. There was a reason for this, but she hadn't yet revealed the truth to her family. The phone rang, pulling Catherine from her thoughts. It was her mother. "Happy birthday, Kathy. You're coming home tomorrow, right?" Barbara's voice was warm but carried a hint of tension. "Yes, of course, Mom. My flight is scheduled to arrive at 3 in the afternoon," Catherine replied, gazing at the night view outside her window. "Everyone's looking forward to it. It's been a while." After hanging up, Catherine let out a deep sigh. Behind her mother's words, she heard a different meaning. Everyone is looking forward to your money. Catherine took a large envelope from her desk drawer. Inside was a thick stack of documents. This was the reason for her recent silence and the special gift she intended to give her family tomorrow. Willow Creek was the quiet town Catherine remembered. As the taxi stopped in front of her family home, the 2-story white house looked smaller than she remembered. Faded wooden chairs sat on the front porch, and flowers her mother cherished bloomed in the garden. The front door opened, and her mother Barbara appeared. Her face had deeper wrinkles than before. Behind her stood her stepfather Howard's large frame, with a smile on his lips but coldness in his eyes. "Kathy, you finally made it," Barbara embraced Catherine, but the hug lacked its former warmth and seemed somewhat formal. Inside the house, other family members had gathered. Her brother Greg worked at a local insurance company. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Arthur were dressed modestly as usual, and their children, Catherine's cousins Becky and Douglas, were also there. And in the armchair at the far end of the living room sat her grandfather Albert. Only grandfather's blue eyes truly lit up with joy when he saw Catherine. "Our family's success story has returned." He stood up, leaning on his cane, and opened his arms to Catherine. Catherine hurried to her grandfather and gently embraced him. "You look well, Grandpa." "Well, I'm showing my age," Albert coughed. "But I'm strong enough to celebrate my granddaughter's birthday." Barbara called from the kitchen, "Kathy, once you've put your luggage in your room, let's all have tea. We have so much to talk about." Catherine headed to her old room. Sitting on the bed in the unchanged room, she took a deep breath and looked at the envelope she was clutching. She planned to give this to her family during her birthday party tomorrow. The thought that the contents of this envelope might forever change her relationship with her family made her chest tighten. Tension hung in the dining room. Catherine felt her family's eyes on her as she took a sip of tea. "So, how have you been?" Ruth asked. "Is life in New York still as busy as ever?" "Well, actually." As Catherine was choosing her words, Greg interrupted. "Seems like you're too busy to keep in touch with us," his voice carried bitterness. Catherine answered while maintaining her smile, "I'm sorry. I've really had a lot going on lately." "Have you forgotten all about us in your New York high-rise?" Becky said with sarcasm. Barbara changed the subject, saying, "Everything's ready for your birthday party tomorrow. I'm planning to bake a lemon cake, your favorite." Catherine gave a grateful smile. Would she have the courage to tell her family the truth tomorrow? Her heart felt heavy, yet simultaneously filled with determination. The next morning, Catherine woke up in her old wooden bed. Her childhood room was like a time capsule, left behind as she grew up. The walls were adorned with high school certificates, college diplomas, and newspaper articles about her first job in finance. Barbara had proudly preserved all these. But that was before she left home. Sounds from downstairs pulled Catherine from her thoughts. She put on her robe and went downstairs. In the kitchen, her mother Barbara was preparing the cake. "Good morning, Mom," Catherine called out, and Barbara stiffened slightly. "Morning, Kathy. Did you sleep well?" Barbara's voice was even colder than yesterday. "Yes, sleeping in my old bed at home brings back memories." "I see." Nostalgic, Barbara said without stopping her work. "I wonder if occasionally sending money after such a long time gives you the same nostalgic feeling." Catherine was at a loss for words. "Mom, I have reasons." "I don't want to hear about reasons." Barbara suddenly turned around, her face flushed. "All I know is that you've forgotten about us lately. You've gone too high up to care." Her stepfather Howard appeared at the kitchen entrance. "Good morning, Kathy." His voice was outwardly cheerful, but his eyes were cold. "Our breakfast probably pales in comparison to what you have in your New York penthouse." Catherine took a deep breath to stay calm. "Not at all. I love the breakfast here." Barbara placed a cup of tea on the table. "Sit down. Everyone else will be here soon." As Catherine sat down, her brother Greg came in. He barely looked at his sister and just said a short "Hi." "Greg, how are you?" Catherine asked warmly. "How's work?" "Fine," Greg shrugged. "Not making millions like you." "Nothing special at a local insurance company." As Barbara placed toast on the table, she said, Greg had a chance for promotion. But he couldn't afford the training. She gave Catherine a meaningful look. "I didn't know," Catherine answered quietly. "If you had told me." "It's hard to get in touch with you these days," Howard interjected. "I guess you're too busy to spare time for the likes of us." After the tense breakfast, Catherine returned to her room and prepared. She carefully applied makeup and changed into an elegant dress she had brought from New York. Then she put the envelope in her purse. She intended to give it to her family at the right moment today. By afternoon, relatives had gathered. Aunt Ruth and Uncle Arthur, cousins Becky and Douglas, and finally grandfather Albert arrived, driven by one of his grandchildren. In the living room, conversation clearly flowed around avoiding Catherine. Family members awkwardly engaged in small talk, and whenever Catherine tried to join in, an odd silence fell. "Do you know who bought Dad's old farm?" Ruth asked Barbara. "The Harrisons. I wonder what they plan to do with it." "That farm on Hansbury Street?" Catherine chimed in. "I remember riding a horse there for the first time." "Yes," Ruth replied curtly and quickly changed the subject. "Becky, how's your new job?" Catherine slowly stood up, saying, "I'll get some water," and headed for the kitchen. She stopped at the entrance when she heard her name. "Kathy's been sending less money lately," it was Ruth's voice. "She used to send a regular amount every month." "She has her own life," Barbara's voice mixed anger and resignation. "I guess living in a New York high-rise is expensive." "But aren't we her family?" Becky's voice came through. "How much her money helped when Mom was sick. And now." "Quiet," Howard said in a low voice. "She might hear us." Catherine returned silently to her seat. With an aching heart, she maintained her smile. As party preparations continued, Catherine sat next to her grandfather Albert. He seemed to be the only one genuinely welcoming his granddaughter. "How have you been, Grandpa?" Catherine asked softly. Albert took her hand and said, "I'm fine, Kathy. But everyone else has been struggling lately. Especially since your support decreased." "I have reasons," Catherine began to say, but Barbara called out loudly. "Everyone, gather around the table. It's birthday time." The dining table was filled with modest but heartfelt dishes. In the center was her mother's special lemon cake, surrounded by what were supposed to be Catherine's favorite foods. However, the atmosphere was heavy, conversation superficial, and occasional sarcastic remarks stabbed at Catherine's heart. "Kathy, you probably don't eat home cooking like this in New York?" Ruth asked. "I'm sure you always dine at fancy restaurants." "Actually, I cook for myself quite often." "I'm busy," Catherine replied quietly. "Busy enough to forget about us?" Greg said sharply. Before Barbara could admonish her son, Howard jumped in. "Kathy, how's your job? Any new projects?" Catherine began talking about a recent major deal. "Actually, last month I finalized a big international project." "And?" Yes, we've heard enough about your great success," Barbara interrupted. "You wouldn't know about our struggles anyway." Catherine swallowed her words. No matter what she said or explained, her family's hearts seemed closed to her. She started to reach for the envelope in her purse, but stopped. It wasn't the right time yet. Only Grandfather Albert looked quietly at Catherine. His old eyes showed understanding and sadness. After the meal, Barbara brought a lemon cake with candles from the kitchen. A slight brightness finally spread through the room to celebrate Catherine's 35th birthday. "Happy birthday, Kathy," the family sang together, but their voices lacked heart. Catherine smiled, staring at the candle flames. What should she wish for? A miracle to change this situation? She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and blew out the candles. "Congratulations," Barbara began cutting the cake. "So, Kathy, anything special happen this year?" That question clearly intended to ask why the money transfers had decreased. Catherine received a slice of cake and answered, "Actually, I've been working on an important project." If it's about money, don't hold back," Ruth said sarcastically. "We're all adults here." In the uncomfortable silence that followed, Catherine was about to reach for the envelope in her bag. However, at that moment, Barbara suddenly stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon. "Everyone, I have an announcement." The room fell silent. Catherine looked at her mother with a confused expression. "We've discussed as a family what we feel about Catherine's return." Barbara's voice was strangely calm. A chill ran down Catherine's spine. Had a family meeting been held in her absence? "We have supported Kathy for a long time, helping her succeed in New York," Barbara continued. "And she has helped us financially. But recently..." Barbara exchanged glances with Howard, who nodded slightly. "Recently, it feels like she's forgotten about us." Barbara's voice began mixing with anger. "During my illness, when Howard's business was in crisis, when Greg struggled with tuition, Kathy always helped. But now, she's too caught up in her luxurious lifestyle to care about us." Catherine tried to speak, but her mother raised her hand to stop her. "So, we propose a vote." Barbara's eyes stared directly at Catherine. "Whether to keep Catherine as a member of this family, or to end it here." The room was completely silent. Catherine's heart pounded fiercely. This must be a joke. But there was no hint of humor in her mother's expression. "Mom, what are you saying?" Catherine said in a trembling voice. "Is this a joke?" "No joke, Kathy." Barbara's tone was cold. "Just as you've abandoned us, it's time for us to let you go." Those in favor, raise your hands. A horrifying scene unfolded before Catherine's eyes. The first to raise her hand was her mother Barbara. Her face showed determination and slight sadness. Then her stepfather Howard, followed by her brother Greg, raised their hands. His eyes remained fixed on the table. "Are you serious?" Catherine asked in disbelief. "Because I've reduced my transfers lately?" "It's not just about money," Ruth said, raising her hand. "We're family. We're supposed to support each other. You haven't been supporting us at all lately." Cousins Becky and Douglas also slowly raised their hands, looking embarrassed. They never once looked Catherine in the eye. "I guess the big city success story doesn't need us country folk anymore?" Greg added. His voice mixed pain and anger. Catherine looked around the room. The only person not raising his hand was Grandfather Albert, who sat in his chair with a confused expression. Tears glistened in his blue eyes. "Kathy, I don't agree with any of this," Albert said in a weak voice. "You'll always be my granddaughter." The room's air was filled with tense pressure. Catherine slowly stood up. Her hands were shaking, but a strange calmness settled on her face. Fighting back tears with all her might, she quietly smiled. "I understand. Your feelings are clear." Catherine's voice was surprisingly composed. "Then I suppose you won't need this." She took the large envelope from her bag and placed it in the center of the table. The envelope was thick, seeming to contain important documents. "I had intended it as one last gift." Catherine broke off. "What is that?" Barbara looked at the envelope with a puzzled expression. "Goodbye. I won't trouble you again," Catherine said and started walking toward the door. Everyone in the family froze. As the raised arms slowly lowered, only Grandfather Albert cried out, "Kathy, wait," and reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Catherine paused at the exit and turned around. A single tear streaked down her face. "Please look inside. It's the real reason I've reduced contact recently." As Albert began opening the envelope, a heavy silence hung over the room. Barbara clutched Howard's arm, and Greg leaned back in his chair. Ruth and Arthur held each other's hands, while Becky and Douglas watched the envelope with anxious expressions. Catherine folded her hands in front of her chest and placed her hand on the doorknob. Now was the moment when the bond between her and her family would be lost forever, or perhaps transform into something new. When Albert's hand went into the envelope and pulled out the first document, his wrinkled face changed with surprise and confusion. "This is..." He was at a loss for words. Seeing her father's expression, Barbara quickly went to his side and peered at the document. The color drained from her face. "Kathy, what does this mean?" Barbara's voice trembled. Catherine took a deep breath, realizing the time had finally come to explain the real reason. The thought that this might be one of the most important moments in her life made her chest tighten. "Mom, everyone, the reason I've reduced contact and sent less money recently is because I had a plan," Catherine said quietly. But at that moment, Greg, who had taken out another document from the envelope, exclaimed, "What is this?" "This is our..." Catherine stepped away from the door and turned back toward her family. There were no longer tears in her eyes. Instead, a strong light of determination shone in them. "Please look at all those documents," she said. "They show how I truly feel about my family." In front of her family, who were taking out the contents of the envelope one by one, Catherine stood straight. She no longer intended to run away. She was determined to explain exactly what she had done and why she had done it. Albert's trembling hand took out one document after another from the envelope. A look of surprise and confusion spread across his face, and eventually his eyes moistened as if he understood something. "This is..." Grandfather struggled with his words. Kathy, is this true? Catherine let go of the doorknob and nodded slightly. Yes, Grandpa. It's all true. The color drained from Barbara's face, and her eyes widened. This is our mortgage. Proof of full payment, Catherine quietly completed the sentence. This house's mortgage no longer exists. I paid it off in full last month. But there were still over 15 years left, Barbara said in disbelief. Howard came to her side and looked at the documents over his wife's shoulder. His face showed a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Kathy, what is this about? Catherine took a deep breath, realizing that the time had finally come to tell the truth. There's a reason I've been sending less money lately. I was planning something bigger for all of you. Ruth picked up another document and began, This is the mortgage for Arthur and me. Yes, I paid off your house loan too, Aunt Ruth, Catherine answered quietly. Greg picked up a large envelope and pulled out several documents. His face showed astonishment. These are my student loans. They're paid in full. A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone stared at Catherine, but the previous hostility had vanished, replaced by expressions of shame and confusion. There's more, Catherine said, watching as her grandfather pulled out more documents. Albert withdrew colorful brochures and reservation confirmations. What are these? Those are tickets for a luxury cruise for all of you, Catherine explained. The Mediterranean cruise Mom always wanted to take. It's a 2-week voyage with private cabins for everyone. The flights are first class too. Barbara's hands trembled. Kathy, but this, why? I reduced my transfers because I was saving for this big gift, Catherine looked straight at her mother. I've been planning it for 6 months. I wanted to pay off all your loans and give the whole family a nice, relaxing vacation. Everyone was speechless. Barbara collapsed into a chair and began to cry. Kathy, what have we done? When Mom was sick, when my stepfather's business was in crisis, I did everything I could, Catherine continued in a steady voice. I thought that's what family does. But recently, I realized a more fundamental solution was needed. Howard held his head in his hands. What have we done? Catherine approached the table and picked up another document. This is an investment trust certificate. It's set up in all your names. It's designed to provide stable monthly income, so you won't need to rely on my transfers anymore. Ruth said tearfully, Kathy, we are sorry. Can you forgive us? I love all of you, Catherine said quietly. That hasn't changed. That's precisely why I wanted to provide you with financial security. But love can't be bought with money. Today, I learned how you truly feel about me. Greg stared at the floor and murmured, Sis, I'm sorry. He struggled for words and covered his face with both hands. We were only thinking about money and your feelings. Aunt Ruth said, crying. Catherine shouldered her bag and said, These are all yours. I'll be going now. Wait, Kathy. Barbara cried out, walking toward her daughter. What you've done for us, She faltered, tears flowing. What a terrible mother I am. Catherine looked at her mother. Her eyes showed sadness, but still affection. Mom, maybe we expected too much from each other. I wanted your approval, and you relied too much on me. But real family is valuing each other, Albert said quietly. Not for status or wealth, but for our bonds. The atmosphere in the room changed. Barbara stood before Catherine and reached out with trembling hands. Daughter, I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Catherine was about to take her mother's hand but hesitated for a moment. The memory of today's vote came vividly back to her. Howard stepped forward and admitted, "Kathy, we were wrong. Perhaps we were jealous of your success. And we became too dependent on your help." Greg stood up too. "Sis, I am ashamed. What was I thinking, voting like that?" "We were projecting our frustrations onto you," Ruth said, wiping her eyes. Catherine took a slow, deep breath. "I wanted you all to be financially independent, free from loan worries, and to create wonderful memories together as a family. That's why But we completely misunderstood your feelings," Barbara said tearfully. "Daughter, could you give us another chance?" Catherine looked at her grandfather. Albert smiled gently and nodded slightly. "Kathy, today you've taught us what real family means." "Don't go," her grandfather pleaded quietly. His blue eyes overflowed with deep regret and love. "Let us make amends." Catherine looked at each family member's face for a long time. She could see the regret, shame, and love in their eyes. Her heart was a whirlwind of confused emotions, deep hurt and the pain of betrayal, along with the bond she had built with her family over the years. "I might need a little more time," Catherine said quietly. "I'll stay at a hotel tonight. We can talk again tomorrow." As Catherine headed for the door, her family watched in silence. Before she left, her grandfather said one last thing, "Kathy, you're truly a wonderful person. I'm always proud of you." Catherine turned back and smiled slightly. "I'll come back tomorrow, Grandpa." As she left the house, the cool autumn night air caressed her cheeks. Complex emotions swirled in her heart, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of release. 1 year later, soft autumn sunlight enveloped the small Pennsylvania town. Catherine drove a silver rental car up a gentle slope and parked in front of her former family home. The house had changed considerably, a new roof, walls painted in bright colors, and a well-maintained garden blooming with colorful flowers. The front door opened, and her mother Barbara appeared. Her face was filled with peace and confidence that hadn't been there a year ago. "Kathy, thank you for coming," Barbara warmly welcomed her daughter. Her voice carried genuine gratitude instead of the former coldness. Catherine embraced her mother. "Your new hairstyle looks lovely, Mom. Do you think it suits me?" Barbara laughed shyly. "I cut it short so it looks neat even when I'm working at the bakery." The small bakery Barbara and Howard had started had become popular in town. They had learned to stand on their own feet and found a new passion in the process. Inside the house, changes were abundant. Greg had returned to the local university to study business management. On weekends, he helped with the community volunteer activities that Aunt Ruth and Uncle Arthur were running. Everyone had been freed from financial burdens and started pursuing their own dreams. In the living room, Grandfather Albert sat in his armchair. Even at 81, his blue eyes remained sharp and warm. "Our family angel has returned," Albert exclaimed happily. Catherine kissed her grandfather's cheek and sat beside him. "You look well, Grandpa." "Thanks to you," Albert took his granddaughter's hand. "The whole family, too." Barbara smiled and took out a photo album. Pictures from the cruise. "It was wonderful. But someone was missing," her mother said. "We missed you." The photos showed the smiling family. Everyone had bright expressions against the backdrop of the blue Mediterranean Sea, but Catherine was absent. "Next time, let's all go together," Catherine suggested. Over the past year, the family had gradually repaired their relationship. Barbara called Catherine once a week, Greg began seeking his sister's advice, and Ruth and Becky continued to send letters of gratitude. And today, they had gathered once again to celebrate Catherine's birthday. This time, it was a gathering filled with genuine love and gratitude. Around the dining table, as candles were lit on the lemon cake, Barbara stood up and raised her glass. Today, we're taking a vote. At those words, Catherine stiffened momentarily. But seeing the gentle smile on her mother's face, she relaxed. Who's grateful that Catherine changed our lives? As everyone raised their hands with smiles, Catherine showed tears in public for the first time. Family means supporting each other. And sometimes forgiving each other. Her heart was filled with warmth. A year after that harsh night, the family had become more than mere blood relations. They were bound by true bonds that recognized and respected each other's value.